If the thought of your toddler or preschooler using scissors gets you a little nervous, you're not alone. Don't worry, because today I'm going to teach you how to introduce your child to scissors step by step. I'll also be sharing some tips and tricks that will help you along the way. So if you want to see the best way to get your little one using scissors safely and effectively, then stick around. If you don't already know me, my name is Jess, and I am currently a work-from-home mom of 2 little boys. However, before I was a mama, I taught kindergarten and preschool for over 12 years. The following are a combination of steps and tips that I have used during my years teaching kindergarten and preschool, as well as what I'm currently using teaching my 2-year-old how to cut with scissors. So the first step you want to take is you want to be sure your child is ready to cut. You want to make sure they're showing interest in wanting to use scissors and start cutting before you even begin to teach them, because if they're not really interested in using scissors or cutting, then they're probably not going to want to do it, and they're more likely to get frustrated in the process. So make sure they're showing an interest and actually want to cut, especially if you're doing this with a younger child. You can totally start introducing around 2 years of age. Obviously, if you as the parent feel like your child is ready, but just know that your child won't fully master the skill of cutting until closer to 6 years of age. Cutting is a really complex fine motor skill, and it does take a lot of strength in the hands and fingers. So please just know going into this is a really, really difficult skill for your child to learn. And the younger they are, the harder it's going to be. But by all means, please, if they're showing interest around 2 years of age, feel free to start them with scissors. My son just turned 2 last month, and we just started working with scissors a couple of weeks ago, so you can definitely do it if they're young. Also, before you start, you want to make sure that you prepare those little hands and fingers. In order to help prepare their hands and fingers for cutting, you can do a lot of fine motor activities. I actually have a fine motor activity series which can help get in some fine motor practice before you start cutting with your child. I will link that down in the description box below, so be sure to check those out if you're looking for some activities to strengthen your child's fine motor skills, which have to do with the muscles and coordination in their hands and fingers. There are a couple of easy activities or exercises that you can do prior to cutting with scissors that will get their hands and fingers ready. You can start with tearing paper. So this is super important, and they actually should definitely do this one before they start cutting. But when they tear paper, this is establishing bilateral coordination skills, which is the ability to use both hands at the same time. You're definitely going to need this for cutting, as your child has to hold the paper and use their other hand to cut. So just tearing paper is a great fine motor activity to help them strengthen their fingers and use their hands and get that bilateral coordination down. Another great exercise that's good for bilateral coordination is just punching holes in paper with a little hole punch. So again, they have to use their hand to hold a paper or an index card I like using. And then I actually just use these little hole punchers that I picked up from Amazon, but these are great for little hands because an adult one is usually too big. So these fit great in a child's hand, and they're really easy to clip. So I will link these down in the description box if you're interested in them, but simply using these to punch holes in, like I said, an index card or a piece of cardstock or construction paper, that will help them with their bilateral coordination skills as well. So in order to get your child to practice the opening and closing motion, a great way to do this before moving on to scissors is by using kitchen tongs. So you can set up an activity really easily with either pom-poms or cotton balls or any small objects that they have to grab with the tongs, so they're practicing that closing motion, and then they have to open the tongs to release the object. So that's establishing that opening and closing motion that they're obviously going to need to use to cut with scissors. My next step is to establish rules and go over safety. This is super important. You want to do this before your child even picks up a pair of scissors. I am really, really strict with my scissor rules. I definitely was when I was a teacher, and I am with my son now. You want to come up with your own rules, but usually the ones I have are, I explain that you can only use scissors with an adult. You can only cut paper. Scissors are only for cutting paper and nothing else. There is a little exception to that, which I will talk about later on in this video, so make sure to stick around. But for the most part, you are only allowed to cut paper. Another rule I have is absolutely no walking around with scissors. If you are a teacher in a classroom, then definitely teach them how to walk with the blade down and with their hand wrapped around the blade. But I highly, highly, highly discourage this in the classroom and made it so that My kids did not have to move around the classroom with scissors. And if you're at home, I highly recommend just making that a rule of your house, just saying no walking with scissors, because you obviously want to avoid any accidents. I also make sure to explain that scissors are sharp and can be really dangerous, so we have to make sure we are listening super well, and we have to be very, very careful when we're using scissors. Another thing I always say, scissors are tools, not toys. We never play with scissors. They are tools to help us do something. They are not toys to play with. My toddler in particular loves running around the house, grabbing things that are not particularly toys. So this is something I really, really need to hammer down with him. Be sure to include whatever rules work for you and your family and your household. Obviously, you want to be sure to always supervise your child when they're using scissors and keep them completely out of reach at all times when they're not in use. Okay, so now that we've established our rules for using scissors, the next step you want to do is model how to use scissors. So this is really important because as adults, something like cutting with scissors to us is just second nature, right? We don't think about it. We just pick up a pair of scissors and we can start cutting. But for a child who's just learning how to do this, they have no idea what to do. So a lot of times you'll see them, they'll pick up scissors with two hands, or they'll stick all their fingers in the second part. So you want to model for them first everything that you want to see with them using scissors. So the best way to do this is to sit next to them so they can see what you're doing. So you're actually gonna talk them through each step. As a kindergarten and preschool teacher, the first couple weeks of school, we're always going through the rules and routines. Literally, like you have to tell them, unzip your backpack, take out your folder, put it on the table, like literally step by step, because they don't know what to do. So this is the same thing with teaching them with scissors, because this is a new skill for them. So you need to break it down as thoroughly as possible. So the first thing you want to show them is how to pick up their scissors. So their thumb is going to go in that little top hole, and then their three fingers, pointer, middle, and ring finger on the bottom. A really important point to hammer home is that the thumb is always pointing up. So I'm going to go over some tricks for this later on in this video. You want their arms to be tucked in close by their side, so you don't want, they call it like chicken winging. You don't want any chicken wings, you want them close to your side, with your elbows in right next to your ribs. Also, you want them to cut away from their body. Make sure they know that they're gonna use their handy helper or their helper hand to hold the paper. So you wanna break each of these down step by step and talk to your child as you're doing them. And you want to go really slow when explaining this stuff. Take your time, there's no rush. Even if you have to break up the steps into separate days, that's totally fine. Just do what your child can handle. So there's a couple things that you want to think about before you actually start cutting with scissors. One thing is you may want to have your child practice with Play-Doh first and plastic scissors. You don't necessarily have to do this. I personally did not do this with my son, but I know that some people prefer to do this first just to get them used to the opening and closing and using scissors that have no like blade or sharp parts or anything like that. So if you think that your child would benefit from that, absolutely do that as a first step, but just know that you don't have to do that. Definitely get good scissors. You want a blunt tip, which is a rounded tip for your child's safety. They have so many different kinds of scissors. Personally, I like to just get child-sized scissors that have a nice grip and the metal blades with the blunt tip. I personally have never had good experience with those plastic scissors. Find them to be usually pretty dull and the blades fall off them. You definitely want them to be sharp enough to cut, because otherwise the paper's just gonna go all over and your child's hand could actually like slip, and I just don't like them. Kids get frustrated with them. That's my personal experience. If you have a different experience or like a brand of those plastic scissors that you really like, please, by all means, drop them in the comments below. Also, those are usually the ones that have like the spring in them. It's like a little switch that you can flip and it will spring the scissors back up for your child. Again, by all means, if you think your child would benefit from them, then go ahead and try it. I just haven't had good experience. And I honestly think that you can just go, like even with a younger child, you can just go right for the scissors that they'll be using once they get to school and in kindergarten and everything. Definitely make sure you get scissors for your child's handedness. So if your child is a lefty, you need to buy lefty scissors. For example, these scissors claim to be ambidextrous, like they can go with either hand, but that's because of the grip. It actually is the blade that matters, because when they're cutting, the blade that's on top blocks the paper and they can't see where they're cutting. So if your child's a lefty, make sure you get them lefty specified scissors. So I just picked these up. I really like these. I got a 3-pack from Amazon. They were like, I think $11 for 3. I like them. They have a good grip on them. They open really easily, so they're comfortable for little fingers. And some scissors, that's another thing that you want to watch, because sometimes I would come across scissors that like would get jammed and they wouldn't really like open and close very easily. So that's really important, especially when your child's starting out, because you obviously don't want them to get frustrated or have an exceptionally hard time trying to open and close them. But I will definitely link these down in the description box below. They also have those loop scissors that you can try. I personally have actually never worked with these, so feel free to try them if you want. But like I said, I just really like going just with like a child metal blade, blunt tip scissor. I just like going to that right away. So after you have your scissors and you're prepared, the next step that you want to do to start your child actually cutting is guide and assist them. So the first way that you can do this is doing hand over hand. So you want to stand behind your child and actually put your hand over their hand on their scissor side and on their helping hand. You actually want to do the motions with them when they're first getting started. One thing that's really important that you want to remember with this is to make sure that your child is watching. I know that sounds silly, but trust me, as an early childhood teacher, I have taught so many kids how to cut, especially when I'm doing that hand over hand assistance. They will be like just looking all around because it's like you're doing it for them. So make sure that they're focusing and really watching what you're doing and taking in those motions. Another thing you can do when they're first starting is you can hold the paper for them. In the very, very beginning, once they're really getting that opening and closing down, it is really hard for them, especially if they're younger, to hold the paper at the same time. So I will do this for my son intermittently. Sometimes he'll hold the paper himself, and then other times I'll just give him a little assistance. If he looks like he's getting a little tired or frustrated, I will jump in and hold the paper for him. And then that just allows them to focus on getting that open and close motion down with their other hand. And then also remember to give them gentle reminders along the way of things that you're seeing that you want them to correct. After you've assisted them and you think they have a good handle on the opening and closing of the scissors, you can gradually let them do it on their own. And of course, you can offer assistance when they need it, but you want to start moving them to getting to cut on their own, obviously. When it comes to paper, you want to start with a harder paper. So think like cardstock or even a paper plate just for practice. And then next you can move on to something like construction paper. And then finally you can move to something like regular printer paper once they have a good handle on cutting the harder paper. When it comes to the things that your child is cutting, you want to start with just simple snipping motions. So either let them freely cut, just snipping at the paper, or you can have them start just snipping along a straight line of paper. And then once they have that down, you want to move to more straight lines, and then you can progress to more complex lines like zigzags and then curved lines. But feel free to try things, and then if it's not working, just go back to what you were doing. So if you feel like your child's good with straight lines and then you move to zigzag lines and they're getting too frustrated and don't want to do it, then just go back to the straight lines. Totally fine. All right, so now I want to give you some tips and tricks that I have picked up along the way. So one of my favorites is the chant that I do. So this is what I would do in my class all the time. It's called open shut. So you say open shut, that's the way we cut, cut, cut. Fingers in the bottom, thumb on top. Do not let the paper drop. Open shut, that's the way we cut, cut, cut. So I would usually just walk around my classroom while my kids were doing a cutting exercise, and I would just repeat that over and over. Things like that, like saying things over and over, it appeals to different learning styles. Sometimes children need to repeat something like that over and over again while they're doing something, just to keep on track and have them focus and remind them of what they're doing. But I would walk around during my kids' centers or something, I would hear them whispering that chant to themselves as they were cutting, which was super cute. So when it comes to finger placement, Obviously, your child's thumb should always be up. Something I would say a lot was give a thumbs up or make sure your thumb's always pointing to the ceiling. There's a lot going on here. So like I said, it's gonna take a lot of patience and it's gonna take a little while for your child to get this down, but don't worry, they will get it. Another thing you can do to remind them to always have their thumb up is to draw a little smiley face on their thumb, or you can put a little sticker on their thumbnail to remind them that they should always see the sticker and that should always be facing up when they're cutting. You can put a piece of tape. You can also put a piece of like colored tape on the top blade so they know that that's the one that they should see when they're cutting. But just be careful with this one. Make sure that you're putting it on that top blade and it's not going in between so that it's interfering with their cutting. So a little tip that I always have done when starting, I have my son put the scissors kind of down in front of him, and they're almost kind of angled where the long hole is on top and the thumb hole is on the bottom. So then I say thumb 1, 2, 3 to teach him how to put his fingers in, and then show him how to pick them up, and they kind of turn their hand. They kind of just get in the habit of when they put them down, they put them down that way when they're cutting. So I find that that has really worked, especially with my preschoolers and kindergartners. My son's just getting the hang of it. We literally just started with scissors like a couple weeks ago. Thumb 1, 2, 3, pick up, thumbs up. Those are just kind of the little prompts that I'll say to remind my son of what to do. If your child's having a problem with that chicken wing or keeping their arms at their sides, you can try and place something under their arm, like a small book or a folder, so that they don't let it drop. However, this can be really difficult. I wouldn't recommend this for like our super young child. If you're doing this with a 2-year-old, I wouldn't really recommend this because this is just gonna be too much going on for them. But if you're doing this with an older child, say like 4 or 5, and they're really having trouble keeping that arm at their side, try sticking something underneath. But I usually prefer to not do that because it's just another thing they have to kind of think about, and there's a lot going on. Another tip I have is to let your child cut other things. So this makes it fun and it gets them cutting different textures. However, the caveat with this is what I talked about before. One of my personal rules is that you don't cut anything other than paper. So this can be a little confusing if you're saying you can only cut paper and then you're giving your child other things to cut, like straws or something. So just make sure they know that it's only okay to cut things other than paper when you provide them and when you give them permission and say it's okay. Another tip I have is to be patient. Like I said, cutting with scissors is a very complex skill for children to learn. It takes a lot of coordination and advanced fine motor skills to be able to do this. So it is definitely a process. So be patient. If your child is getting frustrated, stop. Just stop and try again another time. Definitely go check out my fine motor series if you need more exercises for strengthening your child's fine motor skills. Drop a comment below and let me know what you thought about this video, and be sure to give it a thumbs up if you liked it, and definitely be sure to subscribe if you like educational videos like this. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.